This is Telling the Story, a podcast dedicated to exploring faith, spirituality, arts, and culture, hosted by Ninth Hour Theatre Company in Ottawa, Canada. Thank you for joining us for our podcast series about heroes and villains. Throughout the series, we'll talk with artists and special topical guests, discussing why heroes and villains capture the human need for moral clarity in determining what and who is good and evil. Heroes and villains in stories and literature, in war and conflict, in news and politics, and the ever-changing analysis of who are the heroes and villains in history. What makes our podcast unique is that you'll also get an insider's look into the many artistic and production decisions of a theater company in choosing which stories to tell, and what is involved in putting together a theatrical production. So, sit back and settle in for a stimulating dive into deep ideas and the world of theater magic. Excited to be back for another episode of the Telling the Story podcast, Heroes and Villains in War and Conflict. I'm joined by two new guests to this series, CATHY NOBLEMAN. CATHY is a theater artist with an enthusiasm for discussions about important culture and spiritual issues. CATHY was part of Ninth Hour Theatre Company's 2025 development of the original theatrical piece, Frankenstein AI, as well as performed in the company's productions of Prodigal Son and Halo, in addition to assisting with character work for Ninth Hour's musical Godspell in 2018. She has also performed multiple times with Toto 2 and Ottawa Little Theatre, where she has also worked on directing teams. CATHY has experience vocationally in both journalism and prison chaplaincy, in addition to volunteering in palliative care work. CATHY has her master's in journalism and did her undergrad in French literature, especially a paper on Les Miserables. Very interesting, CATHY, and it's so good to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Wonderful. And I'm also joined by Dr. Richard FEIST. Dr. Richard FEIST is a tenured associate professor in the Faculty of Philosophy at St. Paul University in Ottawa, Canada, where he teaches, researches, and supervises graduate students. He is also the former Dean of Philosophy and the former director of the Masters in Public Ethics program, which is housed in the Faculty of Philosophy. Dr. FEIST has published in a variety of areas such as metaphysics, philosophy of science, philosophy of mathematics, and philosophy of literature. He recently edited and published a collection of essays from scholars around the world titled Jesuits in Science Fiction, Reason and Revelation on Other Worlds. He currently works mostly in ethical theory and the history of ethics, as well as military ethics. He is currently teaching a course at St. Paul on propaganda and is currently working on a couple of books, one dealing with metaphysics and the other is a study of war, ethics, and propaganda. Ooh, he has also taught a course on ethics and the Lord of the Rings. Welcome, Dr. FEIST.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Have you ever played a hero or a villain or dressed up as one in your life?
I've always wanted to play a villain.
Have you?
But I would say, no, I have not played a villain. I have played an antagonist. And that was really fun. I played a very homophobic mother in the Play Torch Song trilogy by Harvey Fierstein. And that sort of culminated in a huge fight that was really fun to rehearse all the time too, and to perform, where we were literally screaming at each other.
Whoa.
And ended with me saying, "I wish you were never born." But I know she's not a true villain because there was instant regret. As soon as the words were out of her mouth, she regretted it. So, yeah.
Now, you delineated the difference between villain and antagonist. What did you mean by that?
Well,
what's the difference?
For me, a villain is someone who is intentionally being cruel.
Okay. Mustache twirling.
And intentionally causing harm to others. Yeah.
I see. What about you, Richard? Have you ever dressed up for Halloween, ever as a kid or otherwise, playing a hero or villain of sorts?
Well, actually, two things come to mind. The first one is the standard being a pirate.
Of course.
For Halloween.
I was that last year, as a matter of fact.
Well, did this happen to you? That your mother made you put your overcoat, your big parka over your costume
when you were kids?
And ruined it?
Of course.
So how can you be a villain?
With the big overcoat on.
And a toque, and it covers everything.
A wimpy villain.
Yeah. So Yes, I want to be. I would want to be pirate. But but the other one that sticks out is my one experience in doing theater was very young, and I played Ebenezer Scrooge.
Ooh.
But is that guy really a villain? He starts off, but isn't he redeemed?
He is redeemed.
Doesn't he give us hope?
He does.
Stuff. So
and
I don't
we
know
see
if
his backstory. Yeah, we empathize. Yeah.
And I don't recall really understanding much of it as a kid, but as I got older, and then when I had children and reading that, it really was a story of hope. But the initial villain was sort of fun.
What did you think about him when you were playing him?
I tried to say bah humbug without being really wooden. I remember the drama teacher saying, no, you have to say it with a little more passion and not so dry. So I didn't really think that.
Yeah, sure. You were pretty young.
I was too busy trying to memorize the lines, and not mess those up.
Right.
Which I believe I did a few times, but but you get through it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, on our last podcast, we discussed the importance of empathizing, like in stories and literature, empathizing with the villain. We talked about Charles Dickens, as a matter of fact, but not excusing their current behavior. So you're empathizing with their backstory and where they're coming from, but you're not saying what they're doing today is okay,
Yes.
So, and Scrooge is a great example of that, I would argue. Yeah. We talked about that
condemn
last
the
episode.
action and not the person.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. That old chestnut. Exactly. The good chestnut.
It is a good chestnut.
Yeah. And I think that raises a sort of a very old problem of morality is the question of justification, right? The distinction between explaining behavior, justifying behavior, because a lot of things we go, okay, looking at Scrooge's history and how horribly he was treated as a child, that would explain why he is. But, do we absolve or justify it? And then that, of course, leads into questions of, personal responsibility, freedom, and all these things.
Yeah,
so,
and in the end, it comes down to choices.
It does. And what always interests me is what is the nature of the choice? That is it a free choice or what, right? Because you always want to be attributing responsibility when you could say, could have done otherwise.
Right.
In many cases we say, well, that person was caught in a certain circumstance and they couldn't have done otherwise, so we don't really blame them. But, like if someone is raised in a terrible situation and then goes on to perpetuate terrible things, how much slack do we cut? Right? That's the interesting stuff that I find. And of course, our legal system is, riddled with that problem.
Yes.
How much of a person's background
are huge.
Yeah.
People who are incarcerated in terms of abuse, absolutely huge. And then when you look at Native Canadians,
yes,
I think it's something like 80-something% have experience of incarcerated.
Yeah. Wow. And that's a great question, isn't it, Cathy? I mean, you worked in some prison chaplaincy. The idea of how much of one's background do you consider in the justice of the current thing that you're weighing, and I think people disagree on that very strongly. Yeah,
I'm not a great fan of the death penalty,
right?
For that reason,
right? Yes, it's very final. It's a very final punishment.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no coming back from
and
that.
There's no nuance.
There's no nuance, exactly. Yeah, and I know you're a fan of restorative justice. And
yes.
We got these words, right? Justification, justice, just, right? And I know you studied Les Miserables, right? It's very interesting in there, what's explored there through justice. Tell me more about that. What's so fascinating about the characters in there in terms of heroes and villains?
In Les Mis?
Yeah, Les Mis, before we dig into the heavy war stuff.
Well, it's I also wanted to, I forgot what I was going to say.
That's okay.
I was going to follow Richard up there. Well, it's interesting because you have a hero who is an ex-convict, and then you have a policeman who absolutely is the villain because he cannot let go of his prejudice and his hate.
Right.
So it's really interesting. And then people who are doing illegal acts like prostitution, again, we're getting into a place where is there a choice in that? And she certainly felt like there was no choice in Les Mis because she had a daughter to support. So.
Yeah, she's a kind prostitute in Les Mis. Yeah. So is Sonia in Crime and Punishment. There's all these examples of people that were, the acts are supposed to be, but these characters are nuanced.
Yes. I mean, I think literature can teach us a lot in terms of just how we shape our thoughts from day to day, because it screams nuance, and that book screams nuance.
Oh yeah. So, that's why it's part of our Gleaning series in 2026. Les Miserables, right? And instead, we're going to dig into that more because it's very fascinating when it comes to heroes and villains.
It's so rich.
Yeah.
And it also, I mean, there are a lot of themes in there that were Victor Hugo's beliefs. So he worked them in, and then every once in a while, and this is what I wrote my paper on, in the book, there are these digressions where he launches into kind of a spiel about social justice.
All of a sudden.
Yeah. It nonfiction, and then goes back to the story. So a lot there.
It is a lot there, yeah. And so, Richard, we're talking a bit about justice, about justification. One question I always want to ask, of course, someone like you is, there's this idea of a just war or a just conflict. Well, is there a definition for that? And how many wars and conflicts would you say even meet that definition or threshold? Yeah.
Well, there's several things going on there. First off, one of the standard problems is trying to find the notion of a war. And the typical definition is largely that it's a large scale, politically organized, violent confrontation between political groups.
Okay.
Right? So it tends to lean towards, if you think, okay, I use the word political a lot, organized. So we're really talking about large scale conflict between nation states.
Right.
That's the traditional understanding of it.
Right.
And the accompanying theory, the just war theory, which is not really a tight theory like general relativity is a tight theory.
Okay.
It's not like that, but it's a collection of ways to think about war in an ethical framework. So it's largely a way to think about wars within an ethical framework, and the wars are between political entities, which runs into problems, of course, because you have lots of things like we use the word war, like the war on poverty.
Right.
Like, what does that even mean?
You're right. War on drugs. Yeah, you're right. We do.
We use the word war in a variety of ways. So when scholars talk about war, it tends to be a very, very, very restricted notion. I mean, we use the word argument in all kinds of ways.
Right.
In philosophy, when I teach my students, I say, well, now that you're under my control in the classroom, you will use the word argument like this. And I give a formalized structure of what an argument is. So that's the attempt to put some kind of sort of parameters on it. And then it runs into problems because the minute you put parameters on things, people say, yeah, but what about? Yeah. So the current controversy is to try and open up the notion of war to include non-state actors.
Okay.
Right? So, namely, dealing with terrorism and things like that, and entities that wouldn't be officially recognized as states, but nonetheless have a kind of political structure.
Right.
So what are the ethics about that?
Ooh.
Right. So that's what, and anyways, that's just kind of the start, and it gets worse from there.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you see ethics being completely thrown out the window of late in wars.
Well, it's always tempting to say that it is, but I think largely, certainly when you're talking about groups like terrorist groups or whatever, they're not too worried about ethical frameworks.
Yeah.
But when you look at large scale democracies, there are constraints on leaders that are somewhat binding because they can get kicked out of office and whatnot. So it's not completely. I wouldn't say that ethics has been completely thrown out because at least there's some semblance of a story trying to be told and some semblance of a justification. Whether or not it succeeds, is another story. We can argue about that.
And maybe morality is something that's a bit finer, bringing it down. I mean, I'm thinking of an article I read a couple of days ago that it was talking both about Israelis and Palestinians and the huge amount of sexual violence that's happening there. Is that a question of ethics, question of morality?
Oh, right. The difference between ethics and morality? Yeah.
Yeah. The question of the distinction between ethics and morality is, I wouldn't say there's a standard accepted way of distinguishing those terms. So sometimes people will say things like, well, morality is sort of the stuff you learn from your mom, and you learn it in a cultural setting. Ethics is something, as Aristotle would say, well, after you've been taught properly by your mom and your dad and your family or whatever, then you come to study ethics as kind of your finishing school, right? And ethics would be more formalized. Right. Kant was like that too. He would say ethics is a formal, theoretical way of handling what we handle just everyday sort of, rules of thumb and things like that.
Yes.
And so you can be bad at philosophy in terms of like ethical theory. You're not very good at that, but you can still be a very moral person.
Right? I see.
And that's what sometimes I try to encourage with my students is like, I'm not trying to teach you anything new to think, but just a better way of thinking more clearly about why you're doing what you're doing.
And where do values fit into that? I'm curious.
Oh, yeah.
Well, values are usually, they tend to be given to us by our cultural surroundings, right?
Okay.
That's usually where they come from.
I was wondering if
once
you had your ethics down, then that just translated to values and how you live your life.
Well, it can.
Or do values
it usually goes the other way.
Yeah.
Values
usually goes the other way.
Yeah. It usually, like if you think about how we raise children, like we say things like, I know you're mad that Joey stepped on your sandcastle, but he didn't mean it. It was an accident. So you don't go and bite him. Right?
You don't declare war over it.
You don't declare war and you use your words.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a value judgment right there that we say, well, I mean, that's also digging sort of a separation between causality and responsibility, right? Because a kid will usually say, yeah, but he did it. We're not denying he didn't. He did it, but he didn't mean to do it. So subverse value we try and stick in there is the notion of responsibility. Right. And then Kant will come along later and say, yes, but what is responsibility? And then he will do a big discussion of it. But the notion of responsibility, you're kind of given that by, whoever raised you or your brothers and sisters, whatever your family background is. That's usually where
you can be helped along with it, because that's a big part of restorative justice is working with people to help them take responsibility for what they've done.
And you're working with something that's sort of already there and developing it. Right. So if someone doesn't have any sense of responsibility, it's pretty hard to work with them.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Which is why Aristotle
they
does
be
say
chosen for restorative justice.
Right. You're not going to go in that program.
No.
So let me ask you about ethics have been ethics. It seems like because you can talk about ethics in technology, ethics in medicine, and with the advancement of technology in medicine, with the advancement of technology when it comes to just, the social media, the internet, AI stuff, I feel we're behind on updating our ethics regarding a lot of these fast moving advancements. War, let's talk about war for 2 seconds. I mean, hundreds of years ago, you just stood in a line, fired a smoky gun, and hoped that you didn't get shot as they shot at you from across the field. And once you fall to the ground, the next guy comes forward and fills in the gap in the line. That's my generic understanding based on the movies that I've watched. That seems so horrible. And war has evolved so much so since then. Like you evolve to the level of being in the trenches, storming beaches, tanks. You go from sword fighting to pistols, to cannons, to bombs, to nuclear bombs, to submarine, to spy agencies being involved. And then to take it even further, you go to just planes flying overhead and dropping things.
People aren't present for it at all.
Now
really.
It's like, what do you call it? They're drones, right? Like drone warfare. So ethics change. No, correct? Like over time, based on the type of war that it is. I mean, if are kids involved? Are there human shields happening? What is is it different for each war? What should be ethically done? Or is it a high standard no matter what technology is even being used? The people, like you said, the people not typically shedding blood, it's just warfare from the sky with drones, and no one, not many at least are dying as compared to what they used to. So have you any thoughts on that sort of changing landscape of war, and how that changes anything about ethics or anything,
Well, I think I would start with making a basic distinction. Does ethics change, or does our understanding of it change? So and our development of it and whatnot. So some people would say things that have a moral realist bent to them, where they say, look, the universe is kind of an ethical place, and we get better understandings of it over time.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right? And so it's objective. Right?
Oh, that's interesting. Right. We're going toward it. We're pursuing it.
It transcends cultures and whatnot.
Oh, that's interesting.
And everything is at and so if you look back to people like Plato, like people like Kant, they would say things that, there's an objective framework, and there's really nothing new to be discovered in terms of that framework, that we kind of know what it is, and maybe we have new examples, and we try to understand it, just like along the lines of a scientific theory.
Right.
That the theory itself doesn't really change. You might get lots of new examples, and you try to incorporate them and use the theory to explain them. But there's certainly, to get back to your other point,
I've never thought about ethics that way. That's so interesting.
Well, it's also a very traditional way, and it's come under a lot of fire because people, a lot of people don't like notions of objectivity and ethics anymore.
Whoa.
And they tend to build ethics into, ethics is more like art. It's a cultural byproduct. So different cultures have their own art. They also have their own ethics.
Right.
And so that's much more fashionable now, which is largely a kind of relativism, which is not new either. That's exactly what the gang, like Socrates and Plato and the gang, they were arguing against that.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So philosophy really starts as a reaction to a number of things, but sort of a relativistic ethics is something Socrates was deeply concerned about.
Yeah, rightly so. I love this idea of, what is transcendently good and true is objective. So why not in the realm of ethics? Like I believe like theology, philosophy, and the scientific method are all ways to unpack what is true and real. Yes. And that something is true and real to be unpacked, right? So I guess I'm I'm someone who believes in objective things.
Yeah, you have what we call moral realism.
Yeah.
But again, then you get into these other kinds of problems that makes people squirm, and that is okay. Well, then some cultures get it wrong.
Right.
And who wants to say that?
No one wants to.
I mean, I'll say it in the abstract. Right. Well, some cultures got it wrong. But if someone says, excuse me, sir, which cultures got it right and which got it wrong? I'm just saying, well, maybe that's a homework assignment.
It's dicey.
I'm not, but that's what you get when you take a notion of an objective framework. Or you could say all cultures are wrong.
Right. No one's got it.
We're all
100% correct.
Yeah,
right.
But, so you want to make certain kinds of decisions as to, where does ethics stand vis-a-vis human experience? Is it something that just is a product of human experience, or is it something independent of human experience that we're trying to get a hold of in the way that we might say, well, the world is out there and science is trying to get a grip on that?
Well, and it's interesting too, when kind of the rubber hits the road in terms of conflict and war, because what starts to happen is a dehumanization of the enemy. And that makes it, I would think, a lot easier to have your actions completely betray even what your culture's ethics
in other words, you can justify anything now because they're not human. They're evil. They're vile.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, that's well, and we talked about it on previous episodes, this notion of creating a hero, that heroes and villains, it's been put forth that these are social constructs, that they are made, that you create heroes and villains, that to do so often diminishes one's humanity. I find that fascinating. And then when we talked in terms of fiction and stories and literature, my guest Adam was talking about how in fiction, particularly in literature, it's important to have clear heroes and villains to teach us what is good and moral and true. And if it's ambiguous and the hero can easily be a villain and the villain can easily be a hero and everything's subjective, well, then ethics and shaping our morality is just thrown out the window, especially for children that are reading these stories. It's clear behavior that's bad, and clear behavior that's good.
Which, of course, is not what human beings are like. They're not that simplistic.
No, they're not exactly. And in terms of war and conflict, I mean, you don't even need to, anyone listening can just imagine what we're talking about. We don't even need to use examples. It's just in the news constantly all the time, 24/7 about, the other side is only doing horrendous, heinous things. And of course, our side is just so innocent. And so we're just sitting there and it's happening to us. And it's like, it's interesting how it doesn't really matter, but both sides seem to, in any conflict or war, it's almost like necessary that you get that propaganda machine going and you get images of it.
That's how you get buy-in, right? That's how governments get buy-in.
You were mentioning that to me earlier, right, Kathy, about the buy-in of like, you need to have a clear maybe message as to why the war is just or justified.
Yeah, even if it's propaganda, and then we can get into Richard's
even if it's propaganda.
Well, that's the central issue of propaganda, is to not only instill belief. Sometimes it's not even that terribly concerned with belief, which is even more interesting because I'm thinking of one of the scholars, French sociologist and thinker named of Jacques Ellul, who's one of the main 20th century thinkers on propaganda. Said that, a lot of propaganda is not terribly concerned with belief. It's concerned with action. Right? Oh. So, and there is often a disconnect between action and belief. And he said, propaganda gets you to do something. And then as you do it a lot, and this is old school, right? If you want kids to behave, you make them behave, right? And then even if they don't like it or believe it, and then the behavior starts to be reinforced by some kind of conceptual justification, which comes later, right? So I've been doing this and doing this and doing this. There must be a good reason. And then the mind will cook up a reason for it.
Right. You can justify anything.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's good when it's like saying please and all that stuff. Then the kid will sort of start internalizing it and then come up with their own personal narrative or some kind of argument. But it's also used in propaganda by, I've been in 15 marches. I'm not sure why I did it. There must be a good reason. I'm a thinker. I've got free will. So people will start to then construct some kind of internal narrative or some kind of logical argument or a justification.
It can sort of justify bullying too, can't it? On the other,
yeah.
If you're good at propaganda, you can justify a lot of scary stuff.
I mean, even with children, they can have an idea, or you can have a parent who's like, you don't put up with that. You're tougher than that, and so it becomes okay to be unkind, to be cruel,
right.
And then one would think that would carry on through a lifetime. Unless there was some good therapy along the way.
Correct.
Yeah, it's like interesting. Like a smart person, a convincing person, good with words, could justify anything after the fact. It could be the most heinous act, and it could be just justified intelligently.
What was the movie where they created a war?
They created one.
Yeah, because the politician wasn't doing well. Wag the dog.
Oh, Wag the dog. Okay. Yeah. That is interesting. I mean, how often are wars and conflicts used as political distractions?
They completely made up a place and put all this propaganda. And it was incredibly successful propaganda.
Interesting.
Yes.
So in war propaganda, correct me if I'm wrong, I think World War II had a fair share of it. Like, it's been going on for a long time, right? Wouldn't you say, war propaganda?
Sure. Propaganda, the term largely comes from the Catholic Church like centuries ago. During the Reformation, right? And there was an institute set up for the propaganda institute, but it was just basically for the spreading of the faith, right? To come back at those Protestants, and to get them back into the Catholic fold, right? So the original term propaganda is not that old.
Okay.
But what we would recognize as propaganda, of course, goes back to the Roman Empire when they would build big arches, to celebrate their war achievements, put their faces on coins, declare themselves gods. So this notion of association, which is one of the tricks of propaganda or the techniques, that's been around for a long time. But the real birth of modern propaganda, like we think of it, like this overwhelming, just
ubiquitous messaging. Like it's just everywhere you look.
Yeah, that largely is very late 19th century and especially early 20th century in the First World War. And it was the British that were the real masters.
Oh.
They were the first masters of it.
In the First World War.
Yeah, they were really good at it.
Wow. Leaflets, whatever.
A little bit of cinema.
Oh, yeah.
Right? A little bit of that.
We talked about that in another episode too, about the arts, like movies and stuff, like what was generated in that time in history. It's like you can link it often to big events going on, you know?
And you see the forerunners of a lot of things today, like the notion of, like TikTok videos that are very short, have one little point. Yeah. Well, the British government was making little tiny videos that they would hook on to a newsreel.
Oh.
Right? So you'd watch your news and then there would be this 2-minute thing about buy British coal.
Right.
And then just, happy people digging coal and and burning it and buying it. Right. And so there were a lot of these kind of little TikTok videos. The other example that comes to mind is one of the the absolute infamous masters of propaganda was Goebbels in the Third Reich, and he used to do reaction speeches. He would take the speeches. This is prior to the Nazis assuming power, or basically grasping power. He would have a recording of a speech. So he'd go up on stage, play this recording, and he'd pause it, and then say stuff. React to it.
Oh, that's interesting.
And mock it and do all that stuff like a reaction video.
Oh, that's like a reaction video, modern day reaction video. Yeah. Someone watching the clip and you're watching them watch it.
And he'd be mocking stuff and doing that. And then he'd put it back on and they play it for a while and then he'd take it off and do his thing. Right. So this is old stuff. Right?
It's almost like the most interesting stuff is often it's often the person commenting on the news is more interesting than the news. And the person reacting to the commentator commenting about the news is even more interesting. Like it gets to these like bizarre layers of, it's just fascinating. And propaganda, like as well, like it's not always bad, right? Like you can have propaganda that propels people to good acts, maybe quit smoking, for example, or whatever. But it seems like it mostly is used for an outcome of the states to make the state look good or something.
I think so. I think so. But it's interesting because when you start digging in to the conceptual notions of what propaganda is, which is largely a way to bypass rational judgment.
Oh.
Right? So that's the key thing. It's a form of non-rational persuasion. Right?
So it's emotion-based then?
Yeah.
Which works.
But also poetry does that too. Right? Like, the arts, you guys are theater people.
Of course. Of course.
Are you propagandists? I don't think so.
We can be.
But you can be.
We certainly can be. And some art arguably could be argued to be that, if it's even classified as art.
But what is it? Shakespeare's Henry V?
I mean, right?
That's a masterpiece of propaganda.
Right? I mean, I've certainly seen plays where it's clear I'm being preached at or taught, and I don't even mean in a religious sense, more in an ideological sense. Like you want me to very much conclude certain political things or take on a particular worldview. And I suppose you can't avoid that. Like a playwright or something has a point to say. They have something to say, but I think we all appreciate good art to sort of raise questions and evoke conversation and offer different perspectives.
And good journalism.
And good journalism. Right.
It's supposed to question.
It seems like, especially in times of modern day conflicts and war, of which there are many as we speak, it seems, speaking of which, it seems like, yes, there's often a lot of, non-questioning and just sort of like, here's what I need you to think. Here's what I need you to walk away believing. It's hard, right, to find sources like that you can rely on reliably and stuff. No,
I have found this whole fake news thing very sad.
Sad, yeah.
Because now no one's trusted.
I know, right?
That's propaganda, right? That has just been grasped like a bouquet of flowers, and you don't have to trust anything anymore.
Now nothing can be trusted, is that what people conclude?
News agencies that are trying to show both sides, that are trying to be fair and equal, are just discounted.
They're lumped in, right?
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's tough, especially if you're not in the war, like you're observing it from another continent. I mean, you either believe what you're being told or not. And I don't know with this, I know that artificial intelligence can do a lot of incredible things, create videos, photos, all sorts, to make people say things they never said. It's a weird day and age, right? And it begs us to question things, to critically think even more, which is a lot of work and no one wants to do it. But, and then back to what you were saying, that the propaganda sort of bypasses rational thought.
Yeah.
And it's just the easy emotional, yes, blue people bad, red people bad, green people bad, and you just have to conclude that.
Immigrants bad.
Immigrants. Yeah. All the different narratives that are flying around. Yeah. It's like, and it's just emotional, convincing and stuff. But we were, Cathy, you and I were talking earlier about this idea that heroes and villains are created and on some level, and then other guests were saying how it's almost necessary for humans to have the structure that there are heroes and villains, even though we know humans are more complicated than that. But are heroes and villains necessary for wars? If you don't establish that very hard, is the war fizzle out? Do you have to really, are heroes and villains the way to go? In other words, if you want to get that war going,
well, it certainly helps. I think that one of the things about getting the public motivated and getting sort of that side of the war off the ground to get the people with you. Yes, you're looking at some kind of propaganda, and you're looking at different layers of it, different kinds of it. As I mentioned, Jacques Ellul, he talks a lot about, in French he uses the plural, in English we always say propaganda, which implies that it's kind of a thing. But, Ellul says, there's propagandas. There's all different kinds. So getting the public motivated usually is done in different layers and different kinds of propaganda, like agitation propaganda, which is usually very simple, very straightforward. It just gets people mad. Right. And then you work on that emotion with maybe more subtle. You've got their attention, so you might have more subtle kinds of propaganda, which is leaning more towards some set of symbols that you want them to associate with their anger.
I see.
Or whatnot. So there's different approaches to it. But I think one of the darkest things about propaganda is that it doesn't work if the audience doesn't already have some semblance of leaning in a direction.
Oh, right? I see.
So if I were to, I think one of the things that, when I was thinking some of the questions for when I came here was, are villains in war or whatever, in the war narrative that's constructed, are villains purely created? And I'd say no. Because if I create a pure villain, it might be fun to read about. Right. Oh yeah, that guy's awful. Right. But if I want to create something that you're scared of, that you hate, to really get something that's a real visceral reaction, gets the hairs on the back of your neck up, and would get you to take action, as opposed to being whoa, that's wicked.
Protests in the streets and whatnot. If I want to get you to do something, right,
I'm probably not going to get you to do something over something that's purely fictional to you.
Right. In other words, a caricature, mustache twirling villain.
It's got to be something that you might have a little bit of a fear about already.
Right.
Right. And that's where a good, an efficient, not good, because that has moral connotations. But it's somebody who's efficient at propaganda reads the room. Right. And there's a really interesting book called Look Who's Back. I don't know if you've heard of that.
No.
It's a novel that came out a number of years ago, and it was made into a movie. And it's basically Hitler comes back. It's written by a German author.
Oh, wow.
And Hitler comes back in the late 20th century.
Late 20th century.
Yeah.
Okay. Like as an old man or?
No, he comes back as a regular Adolf Hitler.
Right. Time travel.
And so it's not a science fiction book that it's interested in how this happens.
Okay.
He just shows up.
Gotcha.
And he's walking around Berlin looking at the place and going, well, this is what I thought would happen, right? This isn't what I wanted. But in the end, it shows him trying to read the room, right? And someone says, hey, you know, the stuff you were talking about back then, that's not going to work today.
Oh.
And he says, you're right. It won't. So I got to figure out what will, right? So he shifts, right? He's a chameleon, right? So he's reading the room.
Right.
So what's going to work?
What's the current prejudice?
Yeah, that's right. And so is it, it's not so much against that group, you know? Oh, it's more against these guys.
Right.
Right? Okay, so I'm going to shift my ideology.
Right.
But I'll use kind of the same propaganda techniques. And that's what's really interesting when you look back at a lot of these regimes that were highly efficient at propaganda, Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, their ideology was weirdly fluid. It would move around. The propaganda assumed was the main thing. All the techniques, it's a very formalized structure. So the ideas underneath are not that important, right? Because, you know, for a while, the propaganda was, you know, we Germans are anti-Soviet Union until they signed that deal with the Soviet Union, the non-aggression pact.
Right.
Then the propaganda just keeps on rolling. But now the ideology has to change. Well, Russians aren't so bad after all, right? And then it had to flip and go, yeah, they're bad.
Yes, because it depends on what's going on globally. Just like they are our best ally. They're the greatest threat to our nation. You know, it's just swapping it back.
Now
and
they're
forth.
our buddies.
Yes.
But they're enemies again. I mean, you see that in Orwell's 1984 where, you know, there's the war between Oceania and then Eurasia, East Asia, and it flips back and forth, right? So the ideology is pretty flexible, but the propaganda is always there. Right? And it's ultimately an instrument of power. Right? That's what it's really all about, is people having power and control.
Power over the population.
Yeah, power, you know, that classic horrifying image of, you know, like the boot stamping on a person's face forever. It's all about power.
And this person's a villain. Now, and then propaganda, would you say, I mean, it seems like it's true for decades now, that it's also used in the hero context. Uncle Sam wants you or whatever, like, you know, join the military, become a hero. And I'm not, I don't want to take away from anyone's personal story. Obviously I'm not speaking about anything specific, but you know, we have the Highway of Heroes here. We have, we have all sorts of commemorations for people that we are saying are heroes, and we pin medals on them and all that. Again, I don't want to take away any of that from any individual, but I'm speaking in the realm of ideas as to this idea that we're given heroes. They're ushered out, you know, and they're in the, you know, they're in the highest, they're in the places of power, shaking hands with the leaders, and you know, this person's a hero, you know, and then of course, if you're going to put people on pedestals, what if that pedestal tips over and that person suddenly, they've got PTSD now, whatever. They're not the hero you thought they were. And so on another episode, we were talking about sort of the dangers of putting people on pedestals and making people out to be heroes because they did this. A lot of people would just claim I was just doing my job. I was paid to do it.
And there
I'm not
would
a
be
hero.
heroes on both sides of a conflict.
Ooh, that's such a great point too. Just because you feel like you maybe won the war, even the quote unquote losers of the war would have their own heroes as well.
Absolutely.
And sacrificial lambs and all sorts of stuff. We're doing the beams are creaking about Dietrich Bonhoeffer as part of Gleanings. You know, again, like, is it heroic? I mean, joining a conspiracy to assassinate Hitler, true story. But he was, you know, spoiler alert, executed for it before the war, the day before the war ended, from what I understand. So, but yeah, this idea of like raising people up to be heroes. But I mostly think often in terms of like the sort of like teenager recruitment of like, you can be a hero too, sign up and join. We're going overseas or whatever to get the bad guys. Now is your time to shine. And just how people need to believe that in that narrative that they're part of something, that we're fighting for people's freedoms. And I've spoken to veterans who no longer believe that that's why they were somewhere, that they weren't really there fighting for freedoms of us, so, and it's sad to see, that narrative crash for them. And, it's sad. It's not so simple that the narrative is so clean and, we're heroes. Everyone's a hero, but it's like, it's like when reality hits, like, what do you do with that? So, yeah, so I guess I'm rambling, but the point is, like, propaganda used in terms of recruitment and used in terms of, back our boys and all these other things. I mean, what would you say about that, you guys? You are listening to Telling the Story, a podcast dedicated to exploring faith, spirituality, arts, and culture, hosted by Ninth Hour Theatre Company in Ottawa, Canada. We'll return in a moment with the rest of our discussion.
Ninth Hour Theatre Company presents Beauty Will Save the World, a brand new musical audio drama for the whole family. Embark on a seafaring adventure and thought-provoking cautionary tale about the importance of passing on beauty to the younger generation, where relationships once lost are found again, when tested to choose what they stand for and who they will stand with.
Beauty will save the world! I felt it! I've lived it!
Laughter, action, and tears, reminding us about the sacred things that make life worth living. To listen to full episodes or exclusive behind-the-scenes content, go to beautywillsavetheworld.ca.
I want to more than just survive. I want to hope and feel alive. I want to live, truly live.
beautywillsavetheworld.ca.
And now, back to the discussion. Propaganda used in terms of recruitment and used in terms of, back our boys and all these other things. I mean, what would you say about that, you guys?
You've talked about literature on these podcasts already, and then films that have come out of literature.
Yes.
And that's been a part. You've talked about how long propaganda's existed. I think heroes and villains has been around for eons.
Since the beginning of time.
Yes, indeed.
Since the fruit was eaten in the Garden of Eden, right? So, I mean,
true.
True.
Yeah.
So the Old Testament is just rife with examples of, like, these people are the villains, we're the heroes, we're doing this, we're doing that. Like, so much war and conflict in the Old Testament particularly turns a lot of people off from faith in God because they can't reconcile these stories, right, with a loving God. And, the
Old Testament is a tough read.
It's a tough read. Like, it's just like, whoa, like, it's wild. But yeah, what do you think, Richard, about this? The propaganda, of course, we talked about it being used to sort of like the underlying fear that people already have. This is your enemy. You should be afraid of this. But what about this idea of like propaganda for recruitment to, you can become a hero, join us, and all this other, like, our cause is just, our cause is great.
Well, it's highly effective, just to say the least. And yes, from, the perspective of, how people learn things, how we do learn ethics, as we mentioned earlier, we tend to learn them from parents. We tend to learn them through modeling, right? We do pick up a lot on that, and we watch our parents, our family members or whatever, and we imitate their behaviors until they become, kind of like just standard ways we operate. And then we justify them and put a moral structure in. So that's a very effective thing, is to say, oh, look at this guy. Look at how he acts. Be like him because he's a good guy. Right. So that's very effective. But, it does lead, as Cathy was mentioning, well, now I've got a hero and now I'm not so happy because I've met my hero.
Ooh,
right? And
that old trope, huh? Like, you never want to meet your hero? That's like a saying or something, isn't it?
It is, and it's...
I did hear Jean Vanier speak a couple of times.
Oh, did you? Oh.
And it's like one thing if you hear someone speak, and then another thing if you have dinner with them. It's like, I might not be too happy if I met Plato or Shakespeare.
Right.
And I might walk away and going, geez.
Right.
That guy's awful.
Right, we talked about some leaders in history being rough around the edges, like Churchill and
Churchill was a great
Johnny
example.
MacDonald and all these. Like, oh wow, they did this and that, but I don't know. They might say things at the dinner table, you know, that they can find rough.
But it does, pick up on that problem. Now, in philosophy, we talk about, logical fallacies, counterfeit arguments, right? And one thing that we say is kind of a bad mode of reasoning is to say things like, oh, well, Joe says X, right? And X is bad because Joe's a bad person.
Bro, that happens all the time.
That's something that you should try and avoid, right?
That happens all the time.
Good ideas can come from bad people. I mean,
my heavens.
Orwell, use a more literary example. Think about Orwell's responding to Tolstoy's critique of Shakespeare.
Oh.
Tolstoy hated Shakespeare, wrote this big thing about how Shakespeare was a hack.
Really?
Yeah.
I wonder if did Tolstoy, because Tolstoy wrote this book called What is Art? And it's quite the lovely book. I love it.
It is.
It's a quick read, but he basically didn't think Shakespeare was art.
He said Shakespeare was a bad writer and Shakespeare was an immoral guy and his characters are ridiculous. And yes, you can find passages in Shakespeare where characters just flip, right? They just do weird things. And so, sure. But Tolstoy, links this, Shakespeare's a lousy human being. He's an immoral guy and he's a bad writer. But he kind of links it, right? Like bad person, therefore bad writer. Right? And Orwell says, well, why is it that we still love Shakespeare, right? This didn't work. One of the great novelists of all time, pretty heavy hitter, Tolstoy was.
Oh, yeah.
He didn't really damage Shakespeare's reputation, right? We still have Shakespeare festivals and everyone, even if you can go through a lot of Shakespeare and go, that's ridiculous, right? And there are some bad.
It's well written.
But and there are pieces, like I love Shakespeare, don't get me wrong, but there are some parts of it where you just go, this is awful. Kind of like Ben Johnson's line, where he blotted out 1,000 lines.
Interesting.
But Orwell says something very interesting about art. And he says that in the end, why does Shakespeare live on? Well, there's some residue.
Yes.
That is there, no matter if you hate the artist, right? There's something there that escapes it all. And even though Orwell is famously he's well known for his comment about, all art is propaganda, but not all propaganda is art, right?
All art is
a form of propaganda,
but not all propaganda is art. Wow, I almost feel like the reverse would be true, that not all art is propaganda.
Yeah, but that's more what Orwell's trying to say.
Right.
There's a great overlap between propaganda and art, but neither is embedded in the other. And so there's a residuum of great art that escapes propaganda. And Orwell himself says one of the great sins is he says it's one thing if you say Joe is a dangerous figure, therefore I want to suppress his art.
Right.
And he's like, that's that's the rules of government, right? If this guy's a danger, we're going to suppress his art. But the sin is if you say, well, George is a bad guy, therefore he's a bad writer. Orwell was deeply offended by that, right?
Orwell was deeply offended by that.
He's like, that's much worse.
Well, because it makes no sense. I mean, someone could be brilliant at their craft and be immoral beyond belief.
So,
you know what I mean? They could be talented, but have absolutely zero values. Like, I mean, of course that could be true,
And what makes great art?
Yeah.
Then we get into that question.
I know.
I mean, for me, if I'm seeing theater, for example, and I'm moved, then I tick that box. Because it's made me think, it's made me feel, it's changed me in that moment.
That Tolstoy would agree with you. That real art is the transmission of human emotion from the creator to the one taking it in.
So if that playwright is a jerk to his family,
but you would know it if you're watching,
and we're moved nonetheless. So I guess that's the Shakespeare thing, right?
Well, that's the central point in this in the logical analysis of it as a fallacy. Orwell's analysis of it through art is that, well, okay, if Joe is a rotten person, Joe's art could still be great.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, do we really want to go down the pathway of saying, Well, the Mona Lisa isn't that great after all of a piece of art because new things came out about Da Vinci.
Right.
I mean, so therefore we should yank it out of the Louvre.
We have modern day examples of this.
Lots of
for
people
sure.
want to do that.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's how do you separate out the art from the artist and this idea of, I mean, you can like wait 50 years and it's probably popular again because that person's dead. There's all these interesting examples of it coming back around. And I know it's hard for us, isn't it? Like when that person falls off the pedestal, you really don't want to take in their art anymore. Like it stains it.
If you agree that there's a connection.
Well, there you go.
I mean, like when I think of when I started my philosophical training as a wee lad, that one was drilled into my head by my philosophy professors, namely that, this is a bad way of reasoning, right? So, that the author is independent of the work. And it even dovetails with a lot of literary criticism, right? The nature of a work of art. Who cares who the artist was? The nature of a work of art should be examined on its own, right?
Right.
So there's some very famous works in that where who cares about the artist?
Right.
Right.
Because you could even create, presumably, if you have the time and are good enough, you could create a piece of art that says something you don't even agree with at all. Like if you
it's called commissioned art.
You get in the head.
Yeah. And some of the great art was commissioned.
There you go.
Like even in the Renaissance, those guys worked.
That's so true. Back in the day, and the church was the great patron back in the day. And now it's the government that funds art. So is it even art or is it government propaganda? It makes you wonder.
Michelangelo was a working artist.
Yeah.
He was being paid.
Right.
It wasn't, terms of he was enslaved or whatever. It might have been pretty brutal, the working conditions. I'm not debating that. But nonetheless, a lot of the great works of art, they were commissioned. Some rich, nobleman says, hey, I want you to paint a picture of my daughter.
Right.
Make her look great. And Da Vinci goes, okay.
Even though she doesn't look great or whatever.
Make her look like she's fantastic. I'm going to pay you a lot of money. And, an artist runs up and goes, sure, I'll do that. And away you go. And you get a Mona Lisa out of the deal. It was paid for.
Interesting. Right? Yeah.
So this idea of commissioned art, like companies putting their names on buildings and things like that, that's old stuff.
Or donors putting their names.
Donors.
Right.
That's huge.
Right.
I mean, the ancient Greek athletes were all paid.
Right.
In the original Olympics, they were professionals.
Right.
They were not amateurs. That amateur athlete was cooked up in Britain.
Oh yeah,
yeah. When they reinvigorated the game, when they brought the games back, they decided it was going to be British well-to-do gentlemen, amateurs, and then they could preserve it as their little, country club.
It's so, and you know what, the power of art in portraying like leaders in wartime and just the amount, that play gets censored, that book gets burned because you made that leader look bad. That's such a common thing too. And I remember I saw this play once. It was like, I think it was like a Russian, playwright or whatever who really wanted to do a play that sort of made the leader look like a fool. And ultimately, he just wrote plays that the leader would it was an actual play about this, so it was like fascinating. But the leader would show up, in the box seats, and it would be the play that you were commissioned to do, and making the leader look really good. But then this in this play, the artist, the playwright in the play. Sorry, I know it's confusing. Sort of like
you're making me think of Hamlet.
Yeah, the playwright had a moment where they just enough of this, and they just couldn't do it anymore. Like their soul couldn't do it, so they wrote the play they really wanted to write, which made fun of the leader and which the people loved. Like the people in the audience loved it, but of course they got that playwright in jail. Even though the masses quite enjoyed it because it was, making fun of the leader, right? So, and sometimes that's all you have left is humor and mockery. That's sometimes all you have left against oppression. Sometimes,
the role of the fool.
The role of the fool, exactly.
I mean, you look at that. That's throughout literature.
Yeah.
And you look at the role of mocking. Power, that's also a way of countering it, kind of getting away with it, using humor. So a lot of the power of mocking powerful rulers that we see today. Right? There's a lot of that's all over the place. That's nothing new. It's good. And it's important, but it's certainly nothing new. But it's also a sign of a fairly free society.
And look at the States right now in terms of the late night show hosts.
Right.
Stephen Colbert is being canceled, and Jimmy Kimmel, they took him off the air for a bit. And so, so that's sort of political satire.
Sure.
Yeah, it's not always
stings
right.
Still.
Oh, it does.
Clearly.
But there's several of these late night hosts that, their bread and butter is mocking the current administration.
Yes. That's true.
Hey, it's a free country.
They don't often get yanked off the air.
I love that, the bread and butter. It's like that's like what the go-to. Yeah.
I mean, and some people, from another.
I love Jon Stewart, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
So he's still in the game doing that. Yeah. Right. And so, that's
the role of the fool, right? The role of the comedian, the jester,
That's a function of art.
And part of it, too, would be if you can't laugh, you're going to cry. So let's help them to laugh.
Yeah. Not to like turn it too dark, but the idea, like, so there's so much that we hear in the news, right, about current wars and conflicts. And I'm sure it's always been the case. A lot of things are always said, like international courts, war crimes, words of genocide are thrown out, words of all sorts of stuff, combatants, civilians, all these different terms. And I get a sense that, like, again, I get a sense that people are clinging to, I don't know what to make of it, but there's all this, like, it seems like both sides are claiming this almost the same thing half the time, and it's really hard to sort out, right? Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys in some of these conflicts and wars. And people get quite passionate about it, even with no skin in the game. They still get really impassioned about it, and it's like, so like, how do you? I mean, let's just theoretically here, philosophically, how does one even assess like conflict and war in terms of like, is it motive? Is it the results? Is it the actions themselves?
Or is it the group? I mean, we were speaking earlier about 9/11.
Right.
And the treatment of Muslims around the world afterwards.
Right,
and
after
how
that.
horrible it was, because
that's right.
They were just all painted with the same brush.
Right.
Whereas it was extremists that did the act, that came up with the act and brought it into being. So
I know, right?
It's,
so like,
it's too simplistic.
It's too simple. I think it is. Like, I think it is very simplistic, and it's very confusing. And like it's you know what I mean? Like how does one? And surely you talk about this in your classes. It's sort of like these contentious sort of contexts in which good people are disagreeing vehemently about who the good people are in this conflict. And
because people are othered, that term.
Right. Like, so how does one help us? How do we think beyond the simplistic narrative of good guys, bad guys in war, when clearly a lot of these conflicts are they're historical, they're long, they're complex, they're geographical, they're all sorts of things, and a lot is said, and most of it I critically think of my way through it. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure that's not true. I often hear something really like extreme. I'm sure that's not actually true. It's probably somewhere between. But what would you give for any sense of like guidance? Like, how can we look at these conflicts? How can we look at them fairly and talk about them without being so, impassioned,
without buying into the propaganda,
and looking at them more objectively. And
well, there's a couple things that come to mind. First off is exactly what you said, that that's not a bad place to start.
Right.
When something seems to be too easy to believe, right, then it's almost too good to be true.
Right.
So if I don't like those guys, and then there's this big event or whatever, and it just shows those guys in a bad light, it's easy to go, see, knew it.
I already knew they were bad, and now I'm confirmed that
and
they're
that's
bad.
confirmation bias.
Yes, it is.
Right?
It
so
is,
be on the lookout for that. I think another thing I tell my students is marketers, propagandists, they love people who think that they're not affected by propaganda.
Oh, no.
Right? That's the favorite. Right?
Oh, boy. Oh,
if you think that you're immune to propaganda, you're my favorite person as a propagandist. Right?
Oh, boy.
Because you just think that there's nothing that you hear that would ever be something that would affect you.
Where your radar's not up. You're just like, oh, no, I'm good. Propaganda doesn't affect me.
Oh, no.
So it sneaks in.
I got it all sorted out. So if you have this kind of
So they present a challenge.
Yeah. So if you have this sort of large scale hubris about your own sort of impermeability to bad arguments and bad propaganda, like no, I got it figured out. Everybody else is a victim of marketing, but not me.
Right.
That is a dangerous position to take.
Right.
Because you do let your guard down.
So I'm very informed because I listen to this or watch this or read this.
And go out to, and the second thing I would recommend is to go to various news sources, various places, because we don't realize how much now that our own searches on Google, our own, it's highly, they're high, they put us into silos.
Right.
Yeah.
So your YouTube, when you go on there and your machine looks different than mine.
That's it.
So your searches. And so you get into this problem of...
My YouTube's very confused about me, just so you know.
Okay, so you're doing...
My algorithm's very confused.
But you're jumping to exactly what I would say to people should do, is put in different things. Yeah. Right? So...
Because I like hearing what the other people are saying about something I don't agree with. Actually, it's challenging. Like, I want to scream at the screen, but like I have to. I need to know what is thought out there that I disagree with.
Well, it's something interesting to do. Like if you pick a figure that you don't like, right? Then go to a media site that is sympathetic to that figure and look at the representation of the figure on that site.
Right. Get a balanced view, right?
They don't see that side of this guy.
Right.
It looks like this. Right. And it helps to do this, like in addition to the, I don't buy it, to look at a variety, because the markets are so large now that if I'm starting a newspaper...
There's noise. There's so much noise.
But it's the market out there is so big that I can start a newspaper or whatever, or video channel or whatever. I can start some sort of media outlet that I just completely cater to a very narrow bandwidth of people. And there's enough people in that bandwidth that I can make a lot of money.
Right.
So in the earlier times, you had to have more balance for economic reasons because the narrower views didn't generate enough revenue. So when you go to large scale publications, New York Times or the CBC or the BBC or Fox News, they have their target audiences. They're big. And they can be as broad or as narrow as they like, and they can still generate a lot of revenue. But if you're watching, let's say you're always watching the CBC or you're always watching Fox News, you're part of a large group of people watching that.
Right.
You're contributing to their profit margins or whatever. And they make enough money, and being narrow works.
Right.
So there's an economic...
a preaching to the choir phenomenon.
But there's an economic incentive, right? So that's why to break out of this, it's a good idea to go and watch stuff as you're doing, to mess up your YouTube algorithm.
Charlie, you're doing
I
great.
mess it up. Yeah. Well, it's like...
So it doesn't know what you are.
No, it doesn't. Right? It's very confused.
No, but that's a good thing. You'll get a lot of different information, and it could be contradictory, and chances are it will be.
Oh, yeah.
But then you have...
It's incredible.
It increases the odds that you have to think your way through this stuff.
Yeah. It's wild.
And put it together for yourself, and that will increase the odds that you're less susceptible to a narrow bandwidth of propaganda.
Right. Yeah, it's just utterly wild.
But it's a lot of work.
What goes on, like an event occurs, and it's like just entirely opposite narratives about it. Like, it's just so wild, like how that occurs. And does media need war to survive? Like, it's like clicks, like they need conflict and war to survive. Like, it just makes you wonder, like, why can't the news be good things happening in the world. I mean, the local news still kind of does that.
I think efforts are made.
I know. What were you going to say, Kathy?
But I was just going to ask Richard, what do you do about the anger that comes up when you're watching the opposite to what you think? I mean, you just sort of put that on pause and go, okay, I'm gonna see this through. Oh, I want to throw something at my computer screen. I'm going to see this through.
Oh, yeah.
I made the joke. I won't say which news outlets give me that anger, but some do. But I've always made the joke of, well, that's kind of my personal medicine ball, right? And so I watch certain outlets that do tend to infuriate me. But I've noticed that the more I watch a variety of things, the less it infuriates me. You get used to it. Really? Oh, yeah. Like, and so I can tell when I speak to friends of mine that within 5 minutes, I can tell what bubble they live in.
Oh, yeah.
Because they just say a few different things from around the political spectrum. And you watch the reaction. And when someone's head blows off when you're talking about this, and they're all nice and calm when you talk about that.
I know.
Well, you know they don't like this, don't watch this, but they love that and watch that.
I know.
But I think people can get better. You know, you desensitize yourself.
Even in the face of real ugliness.
Sure.
I have a lot of problems with that.
I know. And you can tune it out again if you have to.
But that's a very normal. That's a very normal human reaction to be upset about ugliness or whatever. But I think in order to be properly informed, we have to look at stuff we don't like all that much.
Yeah, it's true. Right? To know what others
maybe
believe.
You will, not necessarily you, but maybe if one does this, you think, okay, maybe I was, my views were skewed by other things. Right? And you come to realizations and go, okay, it's not quite as bad as I thought.
Personally, I think they're skewed by my values.
Yeah.
And if I see people who are just the complete opposite,
you get enraged.
But you might not, you might still disagree. Like, I mean, think about, the old great sort of image of Mr. Spock. He had a strong moral sense, but he didn't get angry about stuff. Right? In lots of episodes, he would be like, this is morally unacceptable. And he'd be very calm about it. And I think one of the things we've done today to our detriment in society is associated a feeling of outrage with the act of disapproval. Right? And so I can be very disapproving of things, but I don't, especially as you mentioned, I may not have skin in the game. So I don't feel that visceral reaction, but I'm certainly against these forms of prejudice, even if I don't belong to the communities that are suffering those things. And I'm not going to act like I do. Right?
That's it.
I mean, I'm not going to act like I'm personally offended by it because it doesn't hit me. But I would stand with those that maybe it hits them and they're personally offended. But I'm not going to act like it hits me. That's kind of a Spock sort of stoic approach.
That's a good stance. Yeah.
And you can
it's
be
a good challenge.
Yes, it's a good challenge for us. Yes. I know.
Charlie, maybe we'll have to watch together and you can help me.
I know. And
if I start getting outraged, you could just
calm
me down.
I know. It's like on the last episode, it was just this idea of like maturing as an adult until like the older you get, the more you don't see people as heroes and villains and you see them with more nuance. But then in fiction, Adam was sort of defending this idea of people need to remain in those boxes because it helps shape what we find good and bad. And I'm sort of torn. I think for fiction, the boxes are useful, but I find in real life, they're not always that helpful. Although there are extreme cases where it probably is useful to be like, nope, villain, that person in history, villain, but I mean, it's useful. Before we wrap up, one interesting question. I want to ask you this because it's like, the only other time that I hear the word theater used, and it's in the context of war, and they use the word theater. Theater of war. I've never heard the word theater used other than in the arts and then in war. Like, what is that? What's
theater of war,
that?
The spectacle of war.
Is that what it is?
Largely, yeah. Theater is a broader term than just the way we use it. Right? Okay. So historically, lots of things were called theater that we don't normally think of today.
Okay.
But sometimes instead of theater, battle space or
I think of location.
Yeah.
And even that is becoming increasingly abstract. You talked about drones and all these things, but the notion of the theater of war as a region has been growing increasingly abstract. You mentioned earlier about how ethics changes with the way the war changes. Well, I mean, lots of things changed with technology. The nature of war has changed. How we're thinking about it. You know, even with the introduction of the longbow in the Middle Ages, you know, that changed how we thought about war because people could be far away from each other and still kill each other. And that was regarded at one time as that's cowardice, right? And it was cowardice to use a pike and pull a knight off a horse because, you know, you just picked up a pike and pulled it off. And that guy trained on that horse for years and you killed him with an afternoon's worth of training. How dare you? This is outrageous.
Well, and even like
we need rules.
And the American Revolution with the sort of they what do you call it? The not the traditional military, but the what's that word? The militia. You're just hiding in bushes. You're just sniping them off. You know, how dare you? It's so unethical. But you know what? We want to win, so they're doing it. And then you know, of course, with organized, you know, terrorism and stuff too. Like you're not going to play by rules and stuff. So it just complicates it all, doesn't it? It really does
so much.
Yeah,
super organized to. I don't know. I want to say like disheveled. Kind of war.
Just like whatever.
I mean, Vietnam. Where would you say it started to change, Richard?
You mean towards a more chaotic form of warfare?
Chaotic. That's it.
I'm not sure it's ever really been all that chaotic. I mean, there might be parts in the battle space that are chaotic, but largely these are fairly well governed structures. No matter, they may not look that pleasant, but they're awful. But you know, a lot of. Even when we think, oh, well, that group of people went in there for bad reasons, that's probably true.
Right.
But nonetheless, the people that are commanding these things are highly skilled, usually highly skilled professionals.
Right.
Like in a professional military, they know what they're doing.
Right.
Even if we might say things like, well, this is morally outrageous. Sure.
Right. We can disapprove and all that.
But that's another distinction in thinking about war between those that call for it in a democracy, which are the elected figures, and those that conduct the war, which are non-elected military personnel.
Right.
And so you can have sort of a chaotic side over here with the elected, but usually the military people know what they're doing. They don't really just throw their men and women in suicide missions and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was in Vietnam last year and I saw the tunnels that the Viet Cong used. And that's when I think of, you know, really chaotic war. And it's starting to become, you never knew where the enemy was. But at that, you know, you're making me think about it because yes, that tunnel system was incredibly organized.
Right. They don't just appear out of chaos.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody had to direct that, build them, bring the materials in, get the soil out and dispose of it and cover them so they can't see them.
It was also really interesting in terms of heroes and villains to be there for the anniversary of the end of the war and to see the War Museum. And they call it the American War.
Yes.
Very.
Oh, really? Oh,
there. And very much that the Americans were invaders. Which is talk about
the heroes and villains narrative flipping on its head.
Exactly. And the pride that people had waving their communist flags.
Right.
You know, but
right. Again, like who's the hero, who's the villain? Yeah. Like one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist. There's that old saying, you know.
Sorry to say it, but I mean, just the barbaric things that were done by the Americans in the war too.
Wow.
That museum, I lasted one exhibit and I just couldn't take it. I had to leave because it was the exhibit about the effects of Agent Orange.
Oh, really? Oh, right. Again, going back to sort of ethics and morality. How far do you go to win the war? What rules are you willing to break? Lines to cross?
Speaking of ugly, there's been a lot of ugliness.
Yeah. No. Any last words about heroes and villains in war and conflict? Anything you want to leave the listener as a question, even?
I've been thinking a lot about the whole art aspect of it and how many, you know, like the Lord of the Rings. We didn't get into that. You know, you're an expert on that. It's too bad we didn't get into it. And just how it sells, how war sells, both in literature and in film. I mean, I thought that the Lord of the Rings war scenes were so long.
Right.
But obviously there is a fan base for
We're
this.
fascinated with war, aren't we?
We are.
And combat.
Why has it been such a huge part of art through history?
Great question. Let's leave it there. Thanks for joining us, Cathy.
Oh, pleasure.
And Richard, what about you? Any last words?
Well, I think that just to pick up on that, conflict is intrinsically fascinating. You know, you get a group of people that are peaceful. They go into a large building and they get very excited when two guys in uniforms on the ice start fighting.
Right.
Incredibly excited.
Right.
People scramble from their seats.
Oh, yeah.
Right? We're fascinated. If you're in a shopping mall and everybody's peaceful at the food court, but if an argument breaks out, everybody stops talking and focuses on what's going on.
True.
Right?
We can talk international rules hockey versus the NHL. Which one do we prefer?
But you know what's interesting is how how much hockey, if we want to continue with that image, how a lot of hockey got more aggressive around the world rather than less, right? So if you go back way back to the first encounters, like the Canada-Soviet series in the 72, the difference between hockey was enormous, right? And we were like the brawlers and they were, they didn't really body check. It was just all skating. It's not like that anymore. It's grown a lot more aggressive. European hockey is not like it was in 1972. So humans have a fascination with this. I think the last thought that I would say is just because we're naturally, maybe I hesitate to say hardwired, but because we naturally gravitate towards certain things, we should always keep in mind that doesn't make it good.
Right.
Lots of things we like. Right. I like ice cream. That doesn't mean it's good for me.
Eating it all the time.
I mean, I'd like to eat pistachio ice cream all the time, but it's not good for me.
That's right.
So I think that's an important thing to take away and that goes back to the issue of the fragmentation of the media. It's gratifying to watch stuff that confirms your own biases. It feels great. That's why we do it. But just because stuff feels good, we like it, we might think we need it, maybe we even do need it a little bit. It's always good to say, this is probably not good for me.
Yeah. Is this self-serving?
This is just not a good thing.
Well, thank you, Richard. And thank you again, Cathy. It was so great. This is a wonderful discussion. I learned a lot. And I think we dabbled in so many different areas. So thank you both. This has been Telling the Story, a podcast dedicated to exploring faith, spirituality, arts, and culture, hosted by Ninth Hour Theatre Company in Ottawa, Canada. Thank you for joining us for our podcast series about heroes and villains. You can listen again to this and all our podcasts through YouTube, Spotify, and directly on our website, ninthhour.ca. Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow us on social media, or you can sign up for our newsletter to be the first to receive exciting announcements, opportunities, and behind-the-scenes content about our current and future productions. We hope you'll join us again in Telling the Story.